Hello everyone, my name is Paula Salfate and with my classmates Paulina Mejias and Fabiano Paso, we will present to you the second class based on the next three main topics of our unit, morphology, syntax and semantics. First of all, we want you to know that this class activity is focused and direct to university students or people that manage and know about this topic. Well, in order to introduce our class, first of all, we want to talk about morphology and how these topics entail evolution and changes on words depending on the age in which we are talking and the part of a speech that the word takes within a sentence structure. Secondly, according to syntax, we will be relating this topic with which are the grammar rules that exist and also the improvement of vocabulary and comprehension of different readings. And finally, in terms of semantics, we will be dealing with the associative and conceptual meaning along with the semantic rules, specifically the meaning and explanation of agent and theme. We will be explaining this issue in depth after our class activity in order to make relation between both the class and the issues.
The first thing that we're going to do is the class activity. It will be a reading comprehension exercise. You have to read a short story and look for the following. First, find new words and look up the definition on the dictionary. And if there are more than one definition, you have to choose the most accurate to the context.
So the second activity we are gonna be doing is look for morphemes, and for this we need you to write as much as you can and don't forget to classify them in free or bound prefixes, content function words, or if they are inflectional or deviational.
And finally, you will have to choose any sentence of the short story and draw a phrase structured tree. The Mice by Lydia Davis. Mice live in our walls but do not trouble our kitchen. We are pleased but cannot understand why they does not come into our kitchen where we has traps set as they come into the kitchens of our neighbors. Although we are pleased, we are also upset because the mice behave as though there were something wrong with our kitchen. What makes this even more puzzling is that our house is much less tidy than the houses of our neighbors. There is more food lying about in our kitchen, more crumbs on the counters, and filthy scraps of onion kicked against the base of the cabinet. In fact, there is so much loose food in the kitchen. I can only think the mice himself are defeated by it. In a tidy kitchen, it are a challenge for them to find enough food night after night to survive until spring. They patiently hunt and nibble hour after hour until they are satisfied. In our kitchen, however, they are faced with something so out of proportion to their experience that they cannot deal with it. They might advent they might venture out a few steps, but soon the overwhelming sight and smell drive them back into their holes, uncomfortable and embarrassed at not being able to scavenge as should they.
So as we can see here, we kind of color coded the answers from the previous activities. In this case, the first activity, it's of course an example of the word that you have to look for. In this case, we choose crumbs, filthy, cabinets, loose food, nibble, and scratch. So of course you can look for any other words, but it's a kind of example that we give. The second activity where you have to find the morphemes and classify them is is in pink. The inflectional morpheme S, as in walls, the ed pound inflectional morpheme as in pleased, um, and what the eng endings not always are eng endings, inflectional morphemes, but in this case we took it as one. Overwhelming also, it's a prefix. um, and of course you can see now the answers more clearly in the screen.
For the construction of a tree, we chose the sentence mice live in our walls, but then they do not trouble our kitchen. A sentence is divided in a noun phrase and a verb phrase. The noun phrase here is mice, and the verb phrase is divided in the verb, which is live, and in a prepositional phrase. The prepositional phrase is also divided in the preposition, which is in this case, and a noun phrase that is constructed by a determiner, the possessive adjective, our, and a noun, which is in walls. This tree and this sentence has two sentences, and the second one is divided in a noun phrase and a verb phrase as well. The noun phrase here is they, and the verb phrase is divided in the verb do not travel and a noun phrase constructed by a determiner, the possessive adjective our, and the noun kitchen. Here, the word but is working as something that in syntax is called conjoined sentences, because we have two sentences here and we need a linking word to connect them. In this case, but is the linking word to join these two sentences.
Thanks of this activity, we can realize that all the issues that we exposed at the beginning of the presentation are related with the purposes of the activities. This is because, first of all, in terms of morphology, in the first issue, we wanted to see how the words mutate depending on the context in which we are talking, and also how the meaning.
The second morphology issue that we find is the English morphology. As we have here the quote, an extremely large number of English words owe their morphological patterning to language like Latin and Greek. Um, this suggests that it's complex to teach morphology without taking into account the relation between the historical influence of different language and how English words are formed. This implies that 100% pure English morphology doesn't exist and is influenced by different language, and those differences all that help us putting together all the words, and those words play very important role in the ability of humans to use language creatively. This means that the language is not static and therefore changes. We can see also that the one of the important part of this issue is the formation of words, and the ability that humans have, we as humans have to use the language in a creative way, and being able all the time create new words for or new terms for new things. And it's a dynamic system where it's always evolving and always changes. um, Also the variation that across groups of speakers and over time. The words that we use nowadays are not the same in the 18th century. So that is why we want to address this issue. Now, regarding syntax, the first issue that we are going to cover now is improve vocabulary and reading comprehension. The quotation says, to concentrate on the structure and ordering of components within a sentence. This means putting together in a sequence of order to get well-formed sentence to be able to understand their meaning. Um, be able to comprehend a sentence that if you have not encountered a particular sense in a previous linguistics experience, you are nevertheless able to understand it, because you can recognize familiar units, words that you know, combined into a novel but appropriate way. This means that to get the real meaning of something, you don't need to know all the words in a specific, but some part of them. For example, a child who doesn't know English very well and whose reading comprehension is not as good, when reading a story about the zoo, for example, he will understand the word dog, giraffe, hippo, etc. And does have a general idea of what it's about. um it's gonna help him to understand the story, maybe not the whole story in detail, but an overall view of that story. Now the syntax is help us to get a better reading comprehension, since have a well-formed sentence can easily be understood the meaning without creating confusion. So we have these well-formed sentences that help us to understand just one and precise meaning, and not be confused maybe with the translation thing, that happened with the Spanish, that you confuse some meanings sometimes. um so that is why you need to have well-formed sentences. That way it's easy to understand the whole overall idea of what you say.
The second issue for syntax is grammar rules of English language. Due to the previous activity, we could realize that the grammar rules allow people to create a limited number of well-formed sentences. However, as use says, if we write rules for the creation of well-formed structures, we have to check that those rules, when applied logically, won't also lead to ill-formed structures. This means that in order to produce well-formed sentences, we must be careful in forming rules. However, in English language, there are a lot of rules, as much as there are exceptions in rules. So how can we teach grammar rules when there are a lot of exceptions? For example, for plurals, we have to add, in order to pluralize a word, we have to add an s or es in the word. For example, car plus s is cars, or bus plus es is buses. Following this rule, the plural of mouse should be mouses, but it is mice. So one of the mistakes that you had to identify in the short story is in this sentence. Although we are pleased, we are also upset because the mice behave as though there were something wrong with our kitchen. Mice, the word mice has an extra s, so we are double pluralizing the word. Mouse, mice, mices. Another thing is the odd sentences. We have to understand that a sentence could be syntactically correct but semantically incorrect. In this case, in order to avoid odd sentences, we have to be very careful with the selection of words. In this sentence, for example, the computer hears what you say. As far as we know, computers do not have the ability to hear, so this sentence is semantically incorrect. Another example, I drank 3 glasses of wine. In fact, I drank what was inside the glass. However, there is something called metonymy that allows sentences like this one and make it possible for us to understand it. And a third example, I replied all the test versus I answered all the test. Although replied and answer are synonyms, we cannot exchange them all the time in the same contexts. I answers sounds more accurate than I replied. So semantics help us to avoid these odd sentences.
And finally, as our last issue related with semantics, is about the semantics roles that we can find inside of any sentence. These are agents and theme. First of all, as we can see in this quote by Yule, agents and themes are the most common semantic roles. Although our agents are typically human, they can also be non-human entities that cause action, as in now phrases detoning a natural force, all of which affect the ball as a theme. The theme is typically non-human, but can be human, as in the dog chased the boy. In fact, the same physical entity appear in two different semantic roles in a sentence, as in the boy cut himself. The agent is the one that performed the action. It can be human or not. And on the other hand, there is the theme, that is the one that received the action. Theme is normally an animate, but it does not imply that it cannot be animate too.
As a conclusion, we can say that morphology, syntax, and semantics are topics that help us to understand how the English language is constructed and how can we transform what we think into well-formed sentences that someone else can easily understand. Therefore, teachers must teach that a word is a sequence of sounds associated with a particular meaning, that if we change the order of a sentence, the meaning can also change, and that meanings differ from person to person. Moreover, they can also help us to design methodologies to teach grammar, tenses, as well as vocabulary. For learning students, it's worth to say that vocabulary is the key because as much as vocabulary they learn, the learning process will be easier. Especially for learners of English, it's important to be aware of these topics since they provide us the tools to understand the language, and once we are able to do that, we are able to produce it, orally or written, in a correct way.
According to the above, in an EFL classroom, this is something that it helps because knowing the basis structure, we can create new and equally correct sentences or ideas. So this is really helpful to have a basis where it's easy to understand any type of text, sentence, idea, and it's easy to explain that idea to other people. On the other hand, in a Chilean context, teaching this is kind of complicated because in general we tend to translate in our heads each word, each sentence, each idea. So this can create certain confusion with the meanings. So having this same idea of the basis to have well and correct sentences to easy understanding is really helpful.